Okay, let's get back to our project here. I want to revisit something. I'm glad you're here, Meredith, because first, what I want to address is the word teleological, because you asked me about this and I gave you an answer. The thing is, by the end of what we're doing here, you guys will all know how teleological that word applies to philosophy, but it's basically two general different, completely different contexts. And I always watch these videos afterwards, and I think my answer to you was it wasn't wrong, it just was a little bit truncated and brief because I knew that we'd be getting to this as the term went along, but I don't want to leave it kind of confused. So I think I can make it a little bit clearer. Um, with Aristotle, the idea is that the world is purposeful and we can figure out the purposes of things. Uh, and the word is telos. The Greek word is telos, which means purpose or end or goal. And so, with respect to Aristotle, and this is going to follow through at least until the beginning of the scientific age and most importantly, with Thomas Aquinas. It is thought that you can determine by looking at the world the purpose of things. And this all goes back to Moira, if you remember from our first session, or at least first or second session, the idea the Greeks had that there was a proper order to the universe, and that was called Moira, which is also fate. And this was picked up. We didn't, I don't think, mention this, but one of the Milesians, if you remember, the Milesians were all physicists, but Anaximander also had the idea of justice, or decay is the word. There's two or three Greek words that kind of apply to this: decay, ananke, uh, telos, moira. They're all kind of uh, uh, a suite of terms that have to do with the proper order of the universe. Okay. So anyway, uh, Anaximander thought that there was kind of justice in how things responded physically, how the physical world found its order. There was he actually uses the word justice or ananke, the Greek word for it. And so in other words, there's not just a physical order to the world, there's a moral order to the world. And the Greeks, this was typical of the Greek society, but not just the Greeks. Recently, Doug just sent us this article about Native American language. And one of the, let's say, the uh, pros or the uh, attractions of Native American language is it seems like it's more in tune with nature. And we still to this day use the term Mother Earth. And all through the history of science and philosophy, there's been this idea that somehow the earth, we are related fundamentally to the earth. And so it's not just Aristotle or the early Greeks. We still think this. And for example, there's resonance of this in the Catholic Church's uh, uh, refusal to accept Galileo. Somehow, what Galileo was saying was not um, compatible with their idea of the justice of the universe, the proper order of the universe. His idea didn't fit with that as far as they were concerned. And this is also true of Kepler. Kepler and Copernicus were also trying to figure out the right order of the universe. And they weren't trying to be anti-religious. They were trying to be scientific, but they were trying to find an order to the universe because it didn't seem right to them. The universe didn't make sense. And this comes all the way down to Einstein, who refuses to accept quantum mechanics because uh, as he said, God doesn't play dice with the universe. In other words, he couldn't accept the idea that the universe was uh, irrational. Let's put it that way. Anyway, so this goes all the way back to the very beginning of science, that somehow there's a just order to the universe, and the universe is ultimately rational and has an order to it. And right now we're at a crisis. Anybody in physics, they actually call it this, a crisis in physics, um, in that there are several things that our math and our understanding uh, kind of uh, recoils from. One of them is the lack of consistency between relativity and quantum mechanics. Another is dark energy, another is dark matter, another is black holes. All these things challenge our mathematical ability to come up with a reasonable, rational universe. So anyway, all this is a long string of the idea that the world is purposeful, or at least it is rational and will respond to our efforts to understand it. So in this aspect, the word teleology means what is the purpose of something? And this is also used in science, in biology. We all know that scientists try to figure out what this or that organ or this or that animal, how this or that animal fits into a niche, an ecological niche. Somehow their adaptation must make sense. So we all think the world is rational. Um, so that's a very broad idea of teleology, but in specifically with Aristotle, it means that everything is trying to get to its place, its natural place, its place of rest. Yeah, Meredith, I can't hear you.
I just read a cute little story about some people destroying all of the spiders in their living space because they were afraid of them. And then they had flying cockroaches. And they thought, wonder why this is. And not too long after, they realized that the spiders were their ecological niche in the home of these people was to keep the population of flying cockroaches down.
Well, we're not, us ecological minded people are not above thinking that there's a right order to the universe. And we generally consider man's interference with the universe as it was before we got here, let's say 5,000 years ago, as inappropriate or wrong. Um, it's very hard for any of us to accept the idea that nature just doesn't give a shit what happens. It doesn't care at all. Tomorrow there might be a big asteroid that just blasts the world to pieces and nothing lives. It doesn't care. It's completely devoid of concern for us or the order of things. In fact, if we destroy the life on the planet, well, we don't even have the ability to completely destroy the life on the planet. The catastrophes that have been endured by the planet, like ice ball Earth, uh, snowball Earth, these things are way beyond anything that even our most horrible activities could produce. And yet the Earth endured. So if we destroy our own selves and a bunch of other animals, the Earth will just go on. It'll develop new things. So it doesn't care. And it's very hard for us to, that's interesting. Can you hear me? What's happening here? I don't know. I didn't do that.
You're
Uh,
back.
can you hear me? Um,
Yeah.
anyway, it's very hard for us to conceive of that coldness of the universe, uh, and this is going to play a part in the history of philosophy, particularly in Thomas Aquinas. So that's teleology in a very broad definition with regard to Aristotle. However, I mentioned the thing that confused you, I think, Meredith, was I also mentioned that in ethics we have what we distinguish teleological ethics from deontological ethics. This is completely different from that. Well, it's not, it's a different, teleology still means purpose, to do with purpose. But in ethics, the distinction is between actions that we do to achieve an intended purpose. Like, for instance, let's say fairness. Let's say we want to do something that contributes to the fairness of society. That would be teleological. And because we want a purpose. But let's say we are religious and we think that, I don't know, working on a Sunday is a sin. Let's say we think that. That is deontological. It's based on a rule rather than, we don't think that if we don't work on Sunday, society will be better off. That's not why we do it. We do it because that is the rule. That's how we behave. So in ethics, the difference between those two things is that one intends a result and one is based just on the rule. So this doesn't have that metaphysical context that we saw in Aristotle or that I've discussed for the first 5 minutes. That big metaphysical concept of the world being purposeful and having a right purpose, which we still, many of us, kind of associate with our activities today, that there's a right way to treat the earth and a wrong way to treat the earth. That goes probably as far back as humanity, because most native peoples, I'm not an expert on that. I'm not an anthropologist, but most native peoples have an idea of living in harmony with nature, that that's the right way to live. Not only the right way, but the best way to live. I mean, in other words, the most successful way to live. And we also have this. So that's kind of a idea that nature has a purpose that we shouldn't, that we should try to be in harmony with. That's a different idea from the specific application in ethics. Does that clarify a little bit, Meredith? I
I
can't
mean,
hear you.
yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay,
I
because,
was going to say that one thing you said last time was the purpose of man is to understand.
well, that's okay. That's Aristotle's definition.
Well, and
Uh,
that's Aristotle.
yeah, that's Aristotle. In other
But then
words,
understanding of nature and making it possible to live in harmony with nature, that's also a purpose of ours as
well,
people,
that's a
right?
broader thing. That isn't what Aristotle doesn't say that we should understand nature, and I don't think he'd disagree that we should live in harmony with it. That would be more of a Stoic thing than Aristotle. But uh, specifically, he's talking about man's special purpose. Like, birds have wings, so their purpose is to fly. What's our special talent? It's to understand. And I criticize it on the basis of that I'm not sure how that isn't arbitrary. In other words, a bird would say, well, the man is an idiot. He doesn't know how to fly. And we say, well, the birds are kind of stupid. They don't know how to think. So I think it was, who was that?
We do.
Anaximenes said that if horses had hands and they could draw, they would draw gods in the shape of horses. Uh, I think that was Anaximenes that said that.
So
So we all have our own idea uh, of what is the ultimate kind of value. And Aristotle's saying the ultimate kind of value for humans is our understanding. And he does think that we are at the top of the food chain in that regard. In other words, the most important thing there is understanding, and we're the only ones that can do it. I think Aristotle would say that. And so that's kind of the context of purpose that we're talking about when when we say Aristotle is interested in the teleology or the purpose of things. It's just different from we'll get to the ethical thing. The ethical thing has to do with we're going to talk about Kant and Mill, but they're not specifically. I'm not going to say they completely ignore that idea of the purpose of man, but that isn't what they're talking about. That we should be acting according to our purpose. There's a different kind of thing. So I wanted to clarify that. Yeah, Doug?
It just occurs to me, probably stupidly, that the only serious purpose I can think of for humans, and it applies to pretty much every living thing, is to reproduce.
Uh, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna, excuse me, if you're gonna look at what evolution cares about, yeah, the evolution doesn't care about anything unless it only cares about whether you have the numbers to survive, whether you can produce successfully enough to have enough numbers that your genome and your species survives. Other than that, it doesn't have any care about what you do or how you do it. uh, yeah. So that's one of the reasons I say that I think Aristotle's being a bit arbitrary here. But on the other hand, we can understand that it does seem to be, well, I always think about this. Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living, and that seems very inspirational. But philosophers are always kind of the party poopers here. And I would say, well, Socrates, are you saying that, somebody that doesn't study philosophy, their life isn't worth living? Are you saying like, was Van Gogh a big philosopher? Did he examine a lot of things? Was his life not worth living? That's kind of harsh, isn't it? Or maybe somebody who's mentally disabled, is their life not worth living? Or how about my dog? What a thing to say. That's a horrible thing to say. But yet it seems inspirational when he says it, right? Um, yeah, so I don't think evolution cares one bit about whether we think or examine our lives. Not important. As always has been pointed out, if a home for this mentally disabled people is the only one that survives a catastrophe, then that is the most best adapted group of people that will carry on the genome. So Aristotle, yeah, Meredith, gotta,
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to say I read an interesting article. I think it was in the Smithsonian about the Army not being able to find enough qualified young men to join the Army because they neither passed the physical tests nor the intellectual tests. And their theory is that most young men who aren't otherwise occupied by the time they're big enough, who aren't on some other path, are not suited for the Army because all they've done in their lives is uh, play video games, and so they don't know how to read and they don't have any upper body strength, particularly, and they can't run because they've never run. All they do is scroll through their phones and play video games. And so they have to send them to some rehabilitative camp to get them to be able to pass the tests to join the Army. So we need an army, right? I mean, that's part of
well,
being humans.
yeah, we
It
do, but
will be all women, Meredith, obviously.
um, Meredith, it's not a very good job. So I think the people applying for to be soldiers might not be the our best and finest. It doesn't pay well, and you might get killed. So um,
Well, it's definitely not our best and brightest, but the best and brightest are not interested in going into the
well,
Army.
right, right. Um, I don't know, but video games, by the way, video games are actually great training for running drones. So I think that guys who play video games, in fact, I even think they train them on video games in the Army, if I'm not mistaken.
But they're drone specific video games. They're not. combat video
I
games.
don't know. I'm not a gamer, so I don't know anything about this. Oh, speaking of two things that just occurred to me. First of all, Anne is recuperating, and we hope to see her back here soon. I emailed her that Peter is welcome to join us, but apparently Peter isn't the computer guy, so he always comes with her on her computer. So anyway, I told him that we hope they get back soon. And then the other thing I was going to tell you about is that speaking of video games, I discovered this because video games are such big business, they can afford to have really great graphic artists. And you could go back, and I found two sites that have really great graphics recreating ancient Athens. And I think if you looked on YouTube, you could just say, ancient Athens or something. I'll find the links for you, but they're really amazing. Walking through the recreated Parthenon and the recreated Agora and all of Athens, just as wonderful as you could possibly imagine it. So anyway, that's kind of a cool thing. Now, okay, so the first thing I wanted to do was discuss that teleological thing. Let's see if I got everything set I wanted to get set. Da, 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 da. Yeah, okay. So the other thing I want to do is today is cover the what we call the Hellenistics, or some of us call Hellenistics, and this is the Epicureans, the Cynics, and the Stoics. And some people love these guys. I mean, I'm affectionate. I have an affection for them, but I don't think I'm interested in, and I think most of the core philosophy guys are interested in the real puzzles. And these guys are more like life coaches kind of things. I mean, I'm very fond of Marcus Aurelius, but he's not really raising any interesting questions. I'll read some of his stuff. It's like you can't dislike this guy. He was a general. I don't know if there's been a general who had wiser things to say than Marcus Aurelius. He was fabulous. But it's he's a Stoic, so do the right thing, stiff upper lip, try to live in accordance with nature. Very good. Well, let me read you a couple. This is Marcus Aurelius. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Dwell on the beauty of life. Watch the stars and see yourself running with them. Think constantly on the changes of the elements into each other, for such thoughts wash away the dust of earthly life. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. Well, I mean, I could go on, but who can dislike any of that? I mean, it's just really nice stuff, but it also could fit on a Hallmark card. It's not really something that I'm. I've always been attracted to the mysteries. And as a matter of fact, I think one instinct for studying philosophy is what the kids call FOMO today, fear of missing out. What if I live my life and there's something I just didn't ever think about, you know? What if I get to 90 years old and somebody tells me, "Oh, by the way, Ray Charles is pretty good." I haven't I want to do my due diligence and listen to everybody that has something to say about how I should live. And so anyway, uh, I in doing so, I am attracted to the things that seem mysterious and hard to understand to me. And that's what the philosophers. In fact, I majored in philosophy because I thought I could figure out all my other classes. I can do math, I can do geology, I can do history, it's all, but philosophy, what the hell is going on here? And so that was one of the attractions. So I don't think, just maybe I'm being unfair, but I don't think the Hellenistic philosophers offer that kind of delving into the real problems. Now, let me just say what they thought, though, for The famous cynic is Diogenes, the cynic. You can't dislike this guy. He supposedly lived in a tub. I should look that up. I don't know what the Greek word is. He lived on a tub. He didn't in a tub. He didn't wash or wear clothes. He was just completely, the ultimate hippie. Didn't work for a living. Didn't respect anybody. The two famous stories about him were, and he was always supposedly carrying a lantern looking for an honest man, These are all delightful things, and the famous two stories about him that I like are one, Alexander the Great came to visit him, and he asked Diogenes what he could do for him, and Diogenes said, "You can get out of my light." Yeah. And the other story I like about him
The
was
name
that
of our
some,
boat,
what's that?
my family's sailboat,
What
Diogenes.
about what? I don't know that one. The sailboat?
Oh, Bill, I think you heard. Oh, sorry, Tony. It's Bill.
Oh, I didn't know you guys could make it. So hello, I don't see anything, but
Yeah, we're in the car, so we didn't put up the screen.
Sorry, I thought we were muted, but I guess we're not.
I was
well,
just saying,
okay.
my family had a sailboat named Diogenes. So,
Oh,
so
I get
sorry to interrupt. I didn't know
okay.
we
No,
were
no, no
muted.
problem. Glad you could make it. So just pipe up whenever you feel like it. The other story I like about Diogenes is some rich guy invited him to his house and showed him around, gave him the grand tour of all the vases and the marble floors and the artwork and everything, and gives him the grand tour. And as they're about to leave, he asks Diogenes, "Well, what'd you think?" And Diogenes spits in his face. And the guy says, "What'd you spit in my face for?" And Diogenes says, "Well, everything was so nice, I couldn't find any place else to spit." Um, so you gotta like that guy, I guess. And then with regard to uh, Epicurus, okay, Epicurus is a little more interesting, and he's going to resonate through the ages a bit. Epicurus, kind of like Aristotle, he wanted to base the idea of a good life on empirical things. He wanted to be kind of scientific about it. What constitutes the best life? And he said, the only thing you can trust is pleasure. And today we use the word Epicurean to mean somebody who enjoys fine dining and fine wine and stuff, but that really isn't very fair to Epicurus because he believed you should examine all the pleasures, but the conclusion he came to was that what you want is a life of serenity. The Greek word was ataraxia or repose. And I always imagine this as being a bunch of people in a garden out in the backyard of a house in Bolinas, all wearing hemp clothes and drinking herbal tea and talking in very uh, quiet tones about deep thoughts. That's kind of how I picture, that is kind of how he pictures it. And I'm going, well, just gag me, man. I'd rather do anything than that. That sounds horrible to me. Um, Now, I must admit that in my dotage here, I have a very serene life. I'm very blessed in that way. I have no real worries except the impending end of my demise, but it hasn't happened happened yet. Uh, Other than that, I just got nothing to worry about, and I do like a very quiet life. It's very pleasant to me. But if I had to do this when I was 30, I would have just killed myself. This would be so boring, and so lacking in drama. I would not have liked it at all. So my point being here that oh God, I always have a hard time thinking of this guy. Anyways, a folk singer and a protege of Emmylou Harris, and really great singer. But he wrote a song in which the line was, "Some people like the taste of smoky whiskey, and others think that tea's too strong." I just don't think you can define pleasure for anyone else. I don't see how you do this. Now, when we get to Bentham and Mill, they're going to do this. Bentham believes the same thing, basically. Bentham and Mill believe also that you should base your idea of the good life on pleasure. And Nietzsche says this. Ayn Rand says this to pick a bunch of disparate people. And that kind of shows you how reliable the idea of pleasure is to get a general rule for the good life. You got Ayn Rand and Epicurus and Nietzsche, well, Nietzsche and Ayn Rand maybe, but Bentham. And Bentham, we'll get to this. Bentham has a calculus of pleasure, and it's like how long something lasts, how certain it is that you're going to get it, how intense it is, uh, how fertile it is. In other words, does it lead to other pleasures? This kind of thing. And Bentham thinks you can figure all this stuff out, and I say no, you can't. That just is ridiculous. You can't weigh all this stuff rationally. It can't be weighed rationally. Of course, you do that. This is how we all live. You know, we think, well, if I go to college, will that give me a pleasure? Well, it's not immediate. It's something that's kind of delayed. Is it a fertile pleasure? Will it give birth to other pleasures? You think about that when you decide to go to college as opposed to becoming a journeyman plumber or something. You think about that kind of stuff. But can you calculate all those things? Because he calls it a calculation. I don't I don't think you can. It just seems like an absurd. I'm totally open to your objections to anything I say, by the way, always, because that's where I learned things. But I don't see how you can do this. I mean, I can do it for myself, maybe. In fact, that's why I say we do it for ourselves, but to get a general rule that everybody can abide by, no. Uh,
Well, Tony, I would just say that, the economists would say that we make those decisions based on how we spend our money. The marginal utility of each dollar we spend is a calculation of some sort that we make about what will give us the most pleasure or utility. And so I would say that capitalists would subscribe to that theory.
Yeah, they would say that there is no other measure, and it's a very good measure, and it always is horrifying to me because I I see what everybody spends their money on, and it's not something that warms my heart in general. But yeah, that's a very good. You vote with your dollars, and so if you think it's going to give you more pleasure to watch the Kardashians than read Shakespeare, then that's where your dollars are going to go. And that's going to be a measure of the judgment of pleasure of the American society. I'm not even sure that's very good, though, because if you're going to be Bentham, you have to determine whether there's just so many variables when it comes to pleasure. The immediacy is an important thing in the economy. Always people are always judging by what happened today or yesterday,
For a minute.
and very few people are thinking about economy 10 years from now. Yeah, Meredith.
Well, I think maybe what you spend your money on, sure. But I think also how you spend your free time is very important to, for instance, I'm in a Shakespeare club and we really enjoy reading Shakespeare together. And I'm not sure that we all would have said that about ourselves when we started the club, which is almost 20 years old now. But now we know we do.
You you
So,
you value it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pleasurable. It's downright pleasurable because then you learn when Shakespeare was having the rustics talk to each other in the vernacular in order to keep the audience happy. At the beginning of a play, when he's laying out exposition, he has them say funny things, or at least it was funny to the rustics in the audience then. And you learn things, and you enjoy it. And you make fun of each other's accents.
I think that's
you
spot
make
on,
fun of each
Meredith.
other's accents? Is that what you said?
I did say.
Well, we do that too. What is going on with my camera? Anyway, uh, Meredith, I should tell you this is completely off the track, but there's yeah, I apologize for this, but just give me a minute. There's a term in sailing called Corinthian, and Corinthian means that the boats are sailed by non-professionals. That's what it means. And there's a Corinthian yacht club in San Francisco. And
Ah,
I said, why Corinthian? They said because the Corinthian games were not professional. And I said, well, that was true of the Nemean games. There was tons of games. The Olympian games weren't professional either. What are you talking? Why Corinth? Why Corinth? Because in the ancient world, the Corinthians were known as revelers, partiers. Why pick those guys as opposed to the Olympians? And nobody knew. And so I looked into this. I spent a lot of hours looking into this because I really don't have a life. And so what I discovered was this comes from Shakespeare. And you'll know what the play is, but in one of the play, I don't remember now. I did know, but in one of the plays, the king says, "I can drink with any tinker. I'm a Corinthian lad." Does that ring a bell?
no.
Well, what he's saying is, I'm the king, but I can drink with any common person. I can relate to the common man. I'm not a snob. And
Oh, was that Hal? May have been Hal, Henry IV. When he was a young man, he enjoyed
yeah,
drinking with
I
Falstaff.
think that's correct. And so I came up with, I think this is true too. The first Corinthian yacht club was, oh God, Suwanee Yacht Club in New York, I think. And but I found all this stuff out, and I think that's where it comes from because there's no reason that the Greeks,
I
to
have to.
pick among the Greeks, there was four big Olympic games, and the Corinthians weren't any different from the rest of them. And by the way, they weren't any more amateurs than ours are. I mean, you get a medal from the Olympics, but you also, when you come back, you get a Wheaties box, and you get a lot of money if you're an Olympic champion. That's exactly the same way it was in Athens. Or in the Olympic Games. At the games, you got a wreath, but when you went home, you got all kinds of rewards as being a local hero. So it worked the same way it does now. They were no more amateur than ours are, or they were just as amateurs as ours. Okay, that's my little Shakespeare thing for the day. But I thought of you when I learned that. Um, we're not really going to cover any more than what I just mentioned with Marcus Aurelius. These are the big the three big schools after the death of say Aristotle. The three big schools are the Epicureans, the Cynics, and the Stoics, and they're all just kind of not very deep, and they're not really they're this oh this is another thing to say. They're also not covered extensively in any of the texts. And by the way, I don't know if I've ever recommended this, but if you want a history of philosophy, the best one in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure I'd be willing to argue this, is by our own W.T. Jones. His History of Philosophy. It's 4 or 5 volumes, so it's not just a little afternoon read. But he's so great because, first of all, he has extensive quotes, and he's a very good and knowledgeable critic or commentator on the philosophers. So if you really wanted to get into this, W.T. Jones is my recommendation. Doug, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but I was just curious. I had read someplace that Epicurus was notable for having figured out atoms or molecules or something like that through some
Democritus, isn't it?
mystical logical tricks. I don't know.
The the famous atomists in the Greeks world were Democritus and Leucippus, who we're not covering, but he also was a physicist in that regard. In other words, he thought everything was physical. And Anaxagoras was another one that we're not covering. Anaxagoras was kind of banished from Athens for this kind of thinking because of the same thing that I just mentioned earlier. The idea for some Greeks was repugnant that the world was just physical. This was an idea that they recoiled from to the extent that they didn't find Anaxagoras didn't find a happy place there. And this is what the Catholics did to Galileo. When if you're going to look at a purely mechanical universe, then you're leaving out God. So we don't approve of that. But anyway, the main atomists were Democritus and Leucippus. But he was among that crew. Any other comments?
Yeah, Tony, do you compare the W.T. Jones to Copleston's history?
Uh, it's been so long since I read several of them when I was in college, and the one that impressed me, I think I would prefer Jones over Copleston, yeah. But I can't specifically say why because it's been so long since I read them.
Yeah, no problem.
Uh, and I don't say that just because he's a homer, just because he's pro Pomona. I really do think that's the best one. I think it's still available. All right. So the next thing we're not going to we're going to quit today. It's been long enough, but the next thing we're going to do is transition to Christianity. So the next big section of this class is going to have to do with Christian teachings, starting with Augustine. What I'll do is next time, what I'm going to do is a rundown of what I see to be it's like the compare and contrast assignment from high school. What is the difference between the way Greeks thought about things and the way Christians did? It's quite a long gap. Jesus was, of course, born in supposedly zero, but it took a long time for Christianity to. Yeah, I can just say this much. He if you want to know how the Bible came to be, then I would suggest you read a book which is it's short and not obnoxiously scholarly, called "How the Bible Came to Be." It's very well, you know that book? Yeah, it's really a good foundational, objective idea of what we know about how the Bible. It was an obscure Jewish cult. Um, and then it became a Roman cult, and there was a lot of cults around Rome. This is one of the ones that in Rome they didn't like because the Romans persecution of the Christians, which is very famous and loudly proclaimed in every Sunday school class, was mostly a national security thing. The Romans were a military society, and they thought if you didn't worship the right gods, the gods may not favor them in the next battle. That was what it was about. I don't think they cared much what you believed because the Romans, like the Greeks, had a lot of gods. I don't think it was so much a theological dispute as the fact that you weren't worshiping the gods that were going to help them fight the next war. That was the problem, especially because Jesus was such a peacenik, and you need guys like Ares on your side. So Mars. Ares is a Greek god. Mars is the Roman god. The Romans just renamed all the Greek gods. I'm um, I'm not an expert on Rome because they didn't really. The Romans were like Americans in a lot of ways. They were great at civic projects, aqueducts, stadiums, roads, armies, laws. They were very good at all the civic uh, administration. They were very good at all this stuff. They weren't world leaders in poetry or religion, although they had their guys. But what happened around the fall of the Roman Empire? We have this guy Augustine. There was somebody before him I want to talk about named Tertullian. And then Augustine, the two main Christians we're going to talk about are Augustine and Aquinas, and they're kind of the bookends of the Christian era. Augustine wrote right about the time Christianity was becoming the state religion, and also at the same time Rome was starting to fall. And then at the end of the Middle Ages, we have Aquinas. And the reason I say the end of the Middle Ages is because uh, Christianity dominated the intellectual world for about 1,000 years between Augustine and Aristotle, Aristotle, Aquinas. And what Aquinas did, which it's impossible to actually, provide cause and effect, but what Aquinas did was introduce the thinking of a pagan Aristotle, for which he took some heat. The whole idea that a pagan could have something to say about our belief, Christianity, when he didn't know anything about Jesus, was very offensive to some people. And I've read different accounts about whether I know that he was censored, and one account said he was actually excommunicated after his death for his teaching on Aristotle. Meredith.
Tony, without Paul, there would have been no Christianity, really, because Jesus didn't go around teaching people. The little groups of proto-Christians that formed around the Mediterranean depended on Paul to come and teach them and send them letters. The letters of Paul, you know about those, right?
Yeah. The the
I mean that's it. We know a history professor of ancient history, and he says without Paul, no Christianity.
Well,
So
Paul, famously preached to the Gentiles. In other words, that was a controversy in the early church in Jerusalem that Paul thought you should spread the word. And everybody else said, no, this is our little thing, and you shouldn't, especially you shouldn't teach it to non-Jews. And that was Paul's mission, was to teach Christianity, spread the word to the Gentiles, which he did. He was a Roman citizen and he traveled throughout the Roman Empire. Well, I don't know about throughout, but he certainly went to Ephesus and Corinth and Rome. And it's not clear how he met his demise. That by tradition he was martyred in Rome. Uh, Paul was, but you're probably right. It's so hard to really reconstruct. Um, Certainly, Christianity as we know it wouldn't exist without Paul. Let's just put it that way. Whether or not there would have been a cult of Christians that survived and was less major than Paul, I don't know. A lot of things had to happen. The Christianity had to be made first legal and then the state religion in Rome. And if that hadn't happened, which it could have not have happened, that could not have happened, then we may not have had such Christianity may not have had such an effect on Western civilization, but that did happen. It became the official religion of the Roman Empire towards the end of the Roman Empire, but still. And then you have the Holy Roman Empire, and all those things contributed to the spread of Christianity. So it's really hard to point one thing out, but Paul was certainly, and it's ironic that Paul never met Jesus. This guy who is certainly responsible for a lot of Christian doctrine and Christian proselytizing never never met Jesus himself. It's kind of interesting. anyway, so reading that book, how the Bible came to be, is worthwhile. And then what I'll do is, like I say, compare the Greek way of thinking of things to the Christian way, and then we'll do a little bit of Augustine. What we're going to do is address the philosophical points that the arguments that they introduce, which are important. Augustine on, for instance, the problem of evil, which I should have said the problem of evil is something that was created by Epicurus. The problem of evil is, uh, this isn't exactly how he said it, but this is traditionally how it's received, is if God is good and omniscient and omnipotent, how could evil exist? That is the problem of evil. It's also called theodicy in the tradition. That's another word for it. Theodicy is the problem of evil. And so how could God exist uh, if there's evil in the world and yet he's supposed to be omniscient, omnipotent, and he either the idea is either he's doesn't know about it, or he does know about it and he is powerless to do anything about it, or he does know about it and he could do something about it, but he doesn't, and in which case he's not beneficent. So one of those things you have to throw out, or else you can't believe in God. You have to say, well, he doesn't have one of those powers. That's the problem, and Augustine's going to address that. He has the most successful solution to that, and you can judge for yourself whether it is successful. And the other thing is predestination. We'll talk about that with Augustine, and we're analyzing. Remember, we studied the Euthyphro, and in the Euthyphro, what Socrates does is expose religious beliefs to philosophical analysis. Okay, does this argument hold water? And that's what we'll do with Augustine, and it's what we'll do with Aquinas. So we're interested in whether their philosophical arguments as presented are valid. So that's what we want to do. Um, and then Oh, the one thing I wanted to say, and then I'll stop. One thing I wanted to say about Aquinas is the fact that he introduced a pagan philosopher into Christian belief kind of gave permission now for the Renaissance, intellectual permission for the Renaissance. In other words, a rediscovery of all the teachings of the Greeks that have been lost through the Middle Ages, including Plato. Plato was completely lost until the Renaissance, except for the Timaeus. Aristotle was known during the Middle Ages, and of course was heavily studied by Aquinas, who adopted his teachings to theology, and that remains with us today. So there you go. That's enough of me today. I hear. Let me see. I seeing a chat from Doug. So let's see what Doug has to say. Uh, no, 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 no. John the Baptist. Okay, actually, there was a cult of John the Baptist in the Middle East beyond 1000 Christian era. One other thing I am going to discuss that I don't usually in this section is misogyny in the Christian church. Um, I think this is an important topic, and I'll point out some stuff. And an interesting thing about the Christian church is the cult of Mary. Mary is very important in the Christian church, and it seems to me almost like they couldn't handle the misogyny of the Christian church, and they had to introduce a female god, like we have in Hinduism. We got a female god in Hinduism. The Egyptians had female gods. The Greeks had female gods. And it's almost like, I mean, who knows? I'm just making this up, but it's almost like the Christian tradition felt the vacuum of not having a female deity. And so Mary was raised to the almost the status of a deity. She's not a deity, but we say, Hail Mary, full of grace. Every Catholic knows how to say their rosary. And it's how many churches are Saint Mary's? And so she's a very important figure in Catholicism, and yet, as I'm going to say, it's a religion that's full of misogyny, if I may say so. I think even to this day. All right, geez, I've talked long enough. Sorry, guys. Um, Anything anybody wants to add or criticize or anything like that? Well, okay then. So we will see you Thursday, and on Thursday, what I'll do, like I say, is start to talk about the transition into the Christian world from the Greek world. So we'll see you then.